get on to some great news now, something really encouraging. South Africa's female soccer stars had their moment last week, winning the women's AFCON tournament and returning home triumphant. Well, last night it was the turn of the Lionesses, as the England women's team is known, who beat Germany to take the Euro 2022 title. Let's get all the details from our correspondent in London, Julia Chapman. Julia, good evening. I want to know, is England still celebrating?
It certainly is. There have been jubilant scenes here in London today after this historic victory of the Lionesses, beating Germany 2-1 to become the most successful English side since 1966. This is only the first trophy at a major tournament that England has won since the men won the World Cup more than 50 years ago. So this is being celebrated as a very significant event for the country, and a really remarkable one, given how big the turnout was at the stadium, how widely watched this match was here in the UK. 17.4 million people were watching at home in the country, the biggest audience for a final for any women's football tournament in history, and a huge number as well in the stadium, some 87,000, a record for a UEFA final. So we're seeing really a big upswell in support for women's football more broadly. We're seeing a lot more interest in it, and many people have been taking to Trafalgar Square in central London today to support the women's team, to celebrate the victory, and really applaud this moment in women's sport more widely.
You know, here in South Africa, Banyana, which is our female soccer team, they of course won WAFCON, and they're doing better than our male team, Banyana. Is it the same in England?
It is. It certainly is at the moment. I mean, we saw the England men's team lose in the final last year at the men's Euros in the Euro 2020 that was actually held a year later because of the pandemic. They lost in penalties in a very dramatic fashion in that final match against Italy in the very same stadium this time last year. So seeing the England women coming to victory, doing much better than their male counterparts, is certainly a very significant moment for the country, and one that is being applauded very widely here.
Talk to me about parity, because one of the arguments against paying women as much as men in terms of sport is that men's sport still gets the eyeballs, which gets the sponsorship. But what you've just described to me is incredible coverage and a great deal of interest. In the UK, is there parity in terms of how female football stars are paid compared to their male counterparts?
There certainly isn't. Men are still earning far more than their female counterparts, but things are certainly improving. And one of the reasons that this particular women's football team for England has been so successful is that there has been a really big rise in women's football funding. We've seen a lot more money invested into the Women's Super League over the last 4 years, and that has allowed many of these women to quit their full-time jobs, devote themselves entirely to the sport of football, and that's really raised the standards, which has really made it a much more viewer-friendly sport, one that's much more exciting, much more skillful. But there is still a very big gap. Of course, the sponsorship for men's football is incredibly significant. Male football players are paid in their millions, so there's still a long way to go for women's football. But I think this really does show, this victory that we've seen yesterday, that there really isn't any excuse anymore saying that women aren't drawing the numbers that the men are, because this has really proved that wrong.
I saw some articles saying that there's no bus parade for the Lionesses, and a couple of grumbles that if it were a male sporting victory that would happen. Has there been any criticism about the way it's being celebrated?
Well, there's been a lot of praise, actually, for how the fans have celebrated this particular victory. Sure, some of the celebrations may have been a little bit more muted than they might have been for the men's game, although that is certainly changing, and we have seen quite significant numbers on the streets of London celebrating today. Many people in the pubs, in restaurants yesterday watching this with their young daughters, looking up to role models now in the Lionesses. But what we didn't see, actually, over the last 24 hours was any kind of violence, any kind of unrest. Last year, year's final of the Euros, the men's Euros, was marked by huge unrest, with many fans trying to storm the stadium to get in without any tickets. There was a report later in the year suggesting that fatalities were a near miss. So we do see quite a lot of violence in the stands at men's football matches, and that wasn't the case yesterday. So there's been a lot of praise for those that have been celebrating the women's football and coming out onto the stands to cheer for them. But certainly there are still some discrepancies in the celebrations that we've been seeing afterwards. But on the whole, this is being considered a very positive moment.
Well, thank you.